Sonic Superstars is the newest game hitting the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise, but while it is bringing back the classic 2D side-scrolling approach, it does also bring in some new elements to shake things up a little bit. You could kind of look at this like a follow-up to Sonic Mania, something I was personally really asking for. It doesn't look exactly the same, they kind of ditched the sprite artwork and went with something a little bit more modern, with the 3D models and everything. What really matters though is how it plays, how it feels, and how it adapts all of those classic elements from a 2D Sonic game into the modern era, giving us a fresh take on a classic series. In short, I had a very positive experience with this. While I wasn't completely sold on the entire game during my first playthrough, playing it over again and getting a little more familiar with it, I came to appreciate a ton of elements that I didn't prior. This is a good game, and I think it's a worthy inclusion into this franchise, but we actually do have a review to get into here. I will lightly be discussing spoilers, but I won't be getting super heavy into it. I'm mostly just bringing up an unlockable character, their name, their look, and how their gameplay fits into the larger package. I'm not going to be showing any of the final bosses, although I will kind of share some of my vague thoughts on them. And I'm going to try to show zones and levels that show up in marketing material, and I'm going to try to leave the final zone itself out of this review. With all that out of the way, let's dig in. But first, I want to shout out my partners over at G Fuel. Now, if you're anything like me and you've got a lot going on all of the time, it can be tough taking care of everything in your daily life and still having the energy to do the things you want, like play the newest video games. But personally, I'm looking for an energy drink that not only tastes good, isn't loaded with all that sugar, but does have the right balance of vitamins and caffeine to give me the boost I'm looking for without giving me the crashes or jitters. G Fuel has me covered with a ton of great flavors, including ones inspired by games I love, from Tetris to Pac-Man, Crash Bandicoot, and this weird blue Aeronation that keeps chasing me in my nightmares. But they've got more than just the canned drinks. You can also pick up their powdered formula and a high-quality shaker to take with you on the go. Just add it to some water, give it a good shake, and you're all set. And hey, if you're still in the mood for spooky season, they have a bunch of Halloween-inspired flavors too, like murdery sour, candy corn, gummy worms, and a Halloween edition blue ice. Not to mention their Maiden's Blood flavor, inspired by Resident Evil Village. Give their catalog a look, find a flavor you want to try out, and then use my code Wayneisboss at checkout to save 20% off your order, and it helps the channel out as well. So thank you so much to G Fuel for partnering with this channel. Now, back to the video. The basic premise is that Dr. Eggman has traveled over to the North Star Islands, where he's found a bunch of flickies and larger animals that he wants to use to power his machines. He brings along one of the enemies from the old Game Gear days, Fang the Hunter. They've also recruited the help of a local lizard named Trip the Sungazer. Eggman instructs them to not only gather up a bunch of these animals, but also find this big dragon thing. There's not a whole lot established here, and actually a lot of this sort of foundation is actually in a prologue animation that I don't even think is available in the game itself, which is very, very strange to me. Not that it really matters a whole lot. The plot of this game is a complete afterthought. It really does not matter in the grand scheme of things, which is strange because they do try to lay down some interesting ideas that previous 2D Sonic games have been able to do more with, but I'm also not going to lose any sleep over it. It's not like I was really coming at this for a compelling narrative. Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Amy all arrive on the North Star Islands and start doing what they do best, which is just get in Eggman's way. This is a classic Sonic game through and through. You run around, you jump, you defeat enemies, you collect rings, you get Chaos Emeralds, and yeah, that's the basics of the gameplay. It's kind of what we've done before. It did take me a little bit of time to get used to the physics, which again is strange because they are pretty much the physics from Mania, but I do think that the 3D models just add a bit of visual weight to the characters that just kind of messes with how I see them. My perception of how they should move based on the way these animations work was just a little bit skewed, but I did go and sit down and play Mania again, and it actually really helped with the experience here. After playing Mania for a bit, I hopped back into Superstars and I got adjusted no problem. Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles all play about how you'd expect. If you're used to other 2D Sonic games, you pretty much know how these guys work, how they feel when they move around, everything like that. It's really not far off the mark from how they've always played before. Of course, when it comes to games like this, I'm primarily playing as Sonic. I do enjoy playing as Tails, especially since his flight ability does make it a lot easier to run around through these levels and find old collectibles that I missed on my first time around. And Knuckles has unique abilities that just make him fun to play as. And there are a couple of levels here that really feel like they were just tailor-made for him. One character I was actually really excited to have included in this game was Amy. She's been getting a lot more playability in recent games, and she plays a lot like she does in Origins in Superstars. She is a lot of fun to play as, and I do like that her hammer abilities are in full swing here. Her little double jump here is actually really useful, and I like messing around with it. The physics and core gameplay all feel incredibly faithful here, and I do think that it was probably smart introducing Amy in Origins to kind of get people familiar with her and how she would play in the original games before bringing her into this. Still a little bit of a shame that she's missing in Mania, especially since she's everywhere in the classic series now, but hey, maybe one day. No, that's not gonna happen. We're never gonna get her in Mania. But she does feel like she fits in very cleanly with the rest of the cast of this game. She's kind of like a version of Sonic that has a double jump, and it almost acts sort of like the insta-shield from Sonic 3 and Knuckles. What's nice though is that you can hop out into the world menu at any point, so you have this sort of like a hub area where you can move between the different zones that you want to play through, so you can go back and replay anything that you missed before you keep moving forward. A nice touch here is that in this menu you can actually switch between the characters that you're playing as on the fly, so in the middle of one save file you can just swap which character you're playing as in case you want to keep things a little fresh. I like that a lot. I think that's a good format for a game like this. But what you can do with these characters kind of only matters as much as what they give you to do with those abilities. And I'm happy to say that I'm actually really pleased with the level design here. Things start off strong in Bridge Island Zone. I like this one a lot. It's kind of like a seaside, watery, green hill zone, and it's just a lot of fun to blitz through. Kind of like the first zones in a lot of other classic Sonic games. You get a lot of the same elements of just being able to run around and jump around and stuff like that. But if you start taking some of the higher roads, you start finding new paths and new routes. You start finding new mechanics even. There's these slopes that you can kind of move around, like up into the background, and it's interesting kind of the physics playground that it turns into in these small little sections like that. I also like these little ramps that are scattered around in the sky that you jump into, and it just sends you springing off into all of these different directions. It really does remind me of the days when it was just, what are these small touches of visual flair that we can add in here that just really catch your eye, and you can throw that into a trailer. Kids are gonna see that and just want to mess around with it themselves, and it's very satisfying to play through. Speed Jungle Zone, I also really like a lot. I'm a sucker for green, jungly environments anyway, and man, you can pick up some serious speed in some of these sections too. I really like this sort of Tarzan slide that you're doing on these vines. There's a lot of just being able to, if you know how, you can hit some really high speeds, but you have to be paying attention to where you're going, because if you're just like running around mashing the jump button and you're not really paying a whole lot of attention, you're not going to be getting all that far. The more skill and familiarity you develop, the more fun it becomes. And I wasn't exactly super in love with every zone that I came across. Sky Temple Zone was okay. Pin Carnival Zone, I feel like I've seen a million times in Sonic games. It's kind of like the other Green Hill Zone of Sonic, and it just doesn't really feel like there's a whole lot of extra visual flair here. That, and I've never really cared for circus aesthetics all that much, so this doesn't really do a whole lot for me. Lagoon City, though, I really like this place. It reminds me a lot of Jugpot Falls from Klonoa. If you've ever played that, which you should play Klonoa. But this was another case where it was, if you're good at staying on the higher routes, you can pick up a lot more speed and you can move a lot more freely, whereas making mistakes, it does put you into the lower areas where you'll typically be underwater. So, you know, there is a demand to get good at the game. You know, honestly, I just really enjoyed a lot of the aesthetic charm and the little concepts behind so many of these levels. Sand Sanctuary, I'm not usually huge on desert levels and stuff like that. I really like this zone. The levels here are honestly a ton of fun to blitz through, and I love the idea of these ramps being made of this giant snake as you're just running through the area. The Cyber Station Zone, I think, is just adorable and very fun. I love the way that they play around with the different pixel arts here. You get these new little forms that you progress through the areas in, and you have to, you know, approach them in different ways. I really enjoyed Frozen Base Zone too. I like the aesthetic here. It reminds me of Press Garden from Sonic Mania, and I think that might be one of my favorite Sonic levels of all time. So it was nice to see something kind of reminiscent of that here. That, and there is actually a really fun little surprise in the finale of Frozen Base Zone that I don't want to spoil here, but it is probably one of the better takes on an aerial-based level that Sonic games have seen at this point. Some that I just thought were okay were like Press Factory Zone, which I do think really does take some cool ideas where you have to pay attention to how the background environment is affecting the foreground, as it will just send you launching into the air every once in a while. It's kind of like Wacky Workbench, but not really as obnoxious as that. And Golden Capital Zone is fine, but it feels long. I think that'd really be my only big complaint of that. A lot of these zones can feel like they drag a bit, which, I mean, it is, you know, a modern $60 game. You want to be able to give the player a lot to play with, but it does feel like some of these levels definitely overstay their welcome, and I felt that a lot with Golden Capital. Overall, though, I really enjoyed the design of these, and I'm not just talking about the visuals here. I'm talking about, like, I enjoy how you run through these environments, and it does bring back that classic challenge of what are obstacles that I want to avoid, where are the exact directions that I want to go into. It adds an element of exploration to these 2D planes, and I really enjoy it. It rewards you for going out of your way to find new routes. Part of those rewards, though, come from giant rings that you can use to enter special stages and find Chaos Emeralds. The special stages are honestly kind of weird, and I felt like they were a little hard to get a hold of at first, but once I spent a little bit more time with it, I got a better idea of how to actually use these swinging animations to get myself closer to the constantly moving goal. It's really not that hard once you get used to it. It was inventive, but you know, it's really not my favorite special stage in the world. The Chaos Emeralds actually do have a bit of a new gimmick to them now. Each Chaos Emerald that you obtain actually gives you a new power-up ability that you can use throughout the stages. Once you use that ability, it is gone until you reach a checkpoint, and then you can use it again, but then again, you know, it's a one-shot deal until you get to another checkpoint later on. Not all of these abilities are created equal. I do think that the multiply ability that lets you just bring in a ton of clones of your character that will come swinging in from either side of the screen is really funny to use. I think it completely snaps a lot of these boss battles in half, so, you know, that actually makes it really funny. Some of these other abilities are like the bullet, where you can change your direction in midair and you send yourself rocketing off in a certain direction. The water ability, where you can turn yourself into an adorable little water form and just move around freely in the aqua environments, move up waterfalls, everything like that. The ivy ability that lets you grow a vine out of the ground straight up. I didn't use this one a lot, to be perfectly honest. Neither the vision one. That one is very circumstantial. It will show you hidden stuff that's just kind of around in a couple of areas. Thankfully, the game does tell you when this ability becomes useful, but it is also just like, you're only turning this on if the game tells you to, sort of thing. There is also this slow down ability that lets you just slow down time around you for a little bit. You can avoid certain obstacles, everything like that. Again, the game will usually tell you when a lot of these abilities are at their most useful. I will say the ones that I probably used the most were the Avatar, the one that lets you multiply, and the Bullet. I use water a lot in Lagoon City, but I don't really use it a lot outside of that, and slow did have some benefits. Now, of course, there is one last chaos power, but that one is also very specific to the character that you're playing as, where it will give an extra ability like the homing attack to Sonic. It's just a little thing that's personalized for each character, and maybe it's worth it to you to look for yourself to see what those certain abilities are. It's kind of fun to experiment with, but I didn't get a ton of use out of all of them outside of Sonic being able to use the homing attack during boss battles and such. I actually do really like that these individual Chaos Emeralds do give you these little powers. I do think that they were balanced well in that checkpoints replenish them. If you start using them, they are already on a timer, but if you get hit by an enemy, it's just gone until you hit the next checkpoint. So, you know, you do have to use them somewhat sparingly. You do have to be intelligent with it. I do actually like these. Again, they don't get the same amount of use, but the big thing with this game was, again, kind of like a lot of classic 2D Sonic games, you're never going to get the maximum value out of it during your first run. the more that you play through this game, like those others, the more you'll start to enjoy it, the more familiar you become with these levels and how to progress through them, the more familiar you become with these Chaos Emerald abilities and how to actually use these powers to your advantage. Maybe you can start getting creative, like how can you maybe take advantage of these Chaos Emerald powers in ways the game didn't intend, or it feels very open. It's very, very fun, and I do like that there is this progression here where you're constantly becoming more strong and capable as the game goes on and you collect all of these different abilities. I don't know, it's different, but I'm kind of surprised they didn't do something like this sooner. And of course, you know, once you get all of them, you can turn it into Supersonic and you can turn that on whenever you feel like in the game. But it's nice that they actually did try to shake up the formula with the Chaos Emeralds. I've said in the past that I got a little tired of how constantly the emeralds were being used, but this was a welcome addition, and I actually liked how these played around with that a lot. This is not the only way they shake up gameplay though. We also see the introduction of, again, Trip the Sun Gazer. Now, like I said before, it's a bit of a spoiler here, but she is the unlockable character through this game. I don't exactly want to get too deep into her whole background thing, but you can kind of always tell when you're going through the main campaign that she's not really a bad guy, and you do kind of feel for her just watching her interact with Fang, and he's just like abusing her throughout the entire game, and you just want to take care of her. After you beat the main campaign as one of the other characters, you unlock Trip and you get an entire new campaign where you play as her. Not a whole lot changes narratively here. It's really just, you know, swapping out Eggman for like an Eggman robot. It's something that we saw with Knuckles' campaign in Sonic 3, but she does have her own abilities, whereas she can actually climb walls a lot like Knuckles can, but it feels a little bit faster and she just bounces between these walls a lot quicker. She also has a really useful double jump. She's honestly a really versatile character and she's a ton of fun to play as, but to also kind of complement that, I guess, they made her sections in all of these levels that you go through. You know, in Trip's story, you just go through the entire campaign again in all of these sections, and they made it a lot harder. There's more obstacles, there's more enemies, the bosses have more to throw at you. It's a much more difficult experience. The boss battles themselves, though, you know how I said like a lot of these zones tend to drag on for a little too long from time to time? So many of the boss battles in this game have that exact same problem, and they feel a lot more annoying in that sense. It's not even that a lot of these boss fights are hard, even though they are harder in Trip's story. It's just they are so slow between their animations. There's so much dead waiting time, and it makes these sections a lot less fun to play through. And the final bosses, again, I'm not showing them here, but the final bosses, it's okay in the main campaign. It is really over the top in Trip's, and it's just Trip's final boss. There's so many insta-kill shots. It's too much. And there's no checkpoints in between anything, and it is a really long fight that you just gotta start over from the beginning, and I feel like they went a little overboard in the challenge in that regard. And of course, there is also a true final boss if you collect all of the 7 Chaos Emeralds and you beat the main campaign as well as Trip's, but again, not gonna talk about that too much here. It does come completely out of nowhere. Again, the plot was a complete afterthought for this game, and it has no build-up. It just shows up and you fight it, but it's fine, whatever. Another thing I'm a little bit iffy on is the soundtrack. Now, when this game was coming out, I heard a lot of people talking about the OST for Superstars, and it sounded like they really hated a lot of the tracks in this game, and I really don't know if I do, outside of maybe 1 or 2, and I don't even hate them, it's just that they are kind of grating. The rest of it, to me, is just that it's inconsistent. T-Lopes does bring the best part of the package here. Every track that he puts together is fantastic. I absolutely love Lagoon City Act 2. It is probably one of my favorite underwater themes I've ever heard in a video game. That, it just really really comes together. But then there's a bunch of other tracks in the game, like the boss battle tracks, and then some of the level tracks, where they were trying to synthesize it to sound like it was playing on a Genesis, which feels completely unnecessary. Like, you're going to ditch the sprites from the classic games because you think it looks outdated, but you're going to do this to the music, and so many of the tracks sound so completely different in the way that they're composed. I don't know, it just feels very strange. It was an odd choice, and there's no cohesion between the way this soundtrack comes together, which I think is a shame because, again, I did really come to enjoy this. I like this game quite a bit, and it's one that I think I'll only come to enjoy more as time goes on and I play it over and over and over again. I just wish that the musical compositions came together a little bit more like the rest of the game did. I will say though, visually, it's outstanding. I love what they did here. I know that the animations and everything gave me a little bit of a disconnect earlier on, but once I got used to them, I was able to appreciate just how much work went into capturing a really unique look and style for this game. I like it a lot. I think they did a really good job of just capturing the tone and the visual flair of the original 2D games and bringing it into a 3D space. I think I'll always prefer pixel art. That's just kind of how my brain works. And again, if we're looking back to Mania, which predates this, there's some stuff done in that, even in levels that we're already familiar with, that I can't get enough of, and I almost find it more visually impressive, or that it stands out just a little bit better than what's on offer here. But that's not to say that what is here in Superstars isn't great in its own right. I do really like the way this game looks. Of course, again, this is like a $60 game, and I do think that they tried to pad out the experience a little bit to justify that price tag. Personally, I don't really have a problem with, 2D side scrollers being $60. You see it all the time. I think it's fine. It's just, if you're trying to match a length quota the way this game does, where they introduce these medals that you get through certain special stages or finding them out in the open world, or just they're calculated at your score at the end of levels, you earn these medals to spend in a shop to unlock parts to put on a metal robot so that you can take it into battle mode, which is the most useless thing I think I've ever experienced in a Sonic game. I played this for about a half hour, maybe 40 minutes, and I think I've seen everything I will ever need to see. It's cute that they added a bunch of Lego elements, because I guess, Sega and Lego teaming up and everything like that. There are also skins that you can buy for the characters that are also Lego. Fine, I don't entirely get what the obsession is. But overall, these feel very weightless and just empty, and I don't even think these would cut it as mini games in like a Mario Party, and I don't even really like Mario Party all that much. I don't know, battle mode, this whole like mecha customization thing was fine. I honestly got more out of the mecha customization because of the way they tie it into a certain level in the main game that I don't want to spoil here. But if you put in the time to put together one of these things, it shows up in a kind of fun way. Whereas here, it just, I don't know, I didn't care about battle mode, I'm sorry. Still, I feel like I got my money's worth out of this. Again, it's one of those things where it's just, you gotta keep playing it. It is built for its replayability, and I do think that Trip's story adds a bunch of challenge that really just makes you get more familiar with how to avoid damage and how to move through these environments, and I'm interested to go back to the main campaign now that I've gotten better at it after playing through Trip's campaign. This is a fun game, and I don't even think that it's particularly lesser than a lot of what we've got before. To me, this doesn't feel like a step in the right direction. This feels like a place where I'm happy for Sonic to be. I would happily take another game like this. I enjoyed this a lot, and I enjoyed it more playing again to record footage than I did in my initial playthrough, and I think that that says something, how well realized this is as a platformer that should be incentivizing you to sink a lot of time into it. I really enjoyed Sonic Superstars. If you're not personally comfortable with spending $60 on this particular game, you could always wait for a sale. Otherwise, I recommend play through it more than once, please. A solid playthrough of the main campaign is only about like 4 hours anyway, so it's not that huge of an investment. I do think that this is a worthy game in the lineup, and I'm really happy that we got something like this. And frankly, for whatever it's worth, I think I'm probably a lot more likely to sit down and go for another playthrough of this game than I am Sonic Frontiers. Well, hey, thank you so much for watching. I legitimately hope I actually convinced a few people to give this game a shot and to actually sit down and play through it. I got a lot out of this, I really enjoyed myself, and I'm hoping that you do too. Of course, I only get to make videos like this because of you, my wonderful viewers, as well as my Patreon supporters, and I want to give a special shout out to my current top tier patrons. This month they are Brendan Hess, Brissa Salazar, Earl Valco, Jazzy Jefferson, Jeremiah Harrison, Lederick, McKenzel, Mitch Pym, Nickel Plated, Patricia Marcoux, Seraph13, Cinderin7, Snapkick, Super Hype Mecha SB Mark II, and Surus the Skeptic. Thank you all so much for watching. You make this possible, and you make it worth it. With all of that said, I've got more work to do, and I'll see you next mission.